She should have seen it coming the moment she showed that first sonogram picture. Her mother-in-law had always wrapped cruelty in polite smiles, the kind of woman who'd compliment your dress then tug at the loose thread just to remind you she noticed the flaw. So when she and her husband sat down in his parents' living room, a glossy black and white ultrasound tucked in an envelope like a treasure, she knew exactly who would be the first to look for cracks. "Isn't it too early to tell?" her mother-in-law asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "You're sure about the dates?" She laughed awkwardly, brushing it off. Her husband squeezed her hand, proud and distracted, already talking about baby names. She told herself it was nothing. But nothing grew fast in a family like his. The baby bump became the latest dinner table debate. She heard it in the way his mother asked about her work schedule. "You've been so busy lately." "He's hardly ever home, is he?" She felt it when she offered to help paint the nursery and her mother-in-law declined. "Best to keep things neutral, don't you think?" Like they were planning for someone else's child. At church, neighbors started asking odd questions. "You're due soon, right?" "Funny, I thought you two weren't even trying yet." At first, she wondered if she was imagining it. Paranoia whispered in her ear when she should have been sleeping. She told herself to let it go, but every week, the seeds her mother-in-law planted sprouted in new conversations, new rumors. Her husband, bless him, tried to ignore it. He wasn't blind, he just didn't want to see. He'd call his mother, listen to her play the victim. "I'm just worried about you, honey. You have to admit it's suspicious," and then he'd come home quieter than before, giving her these looks, like he was comparing the curve of her belly to the dates on a calendar in his mind. The worst part wasn't the rumors themselves. It was the way they made her feel filthy in her own home. She'd wake up at 3 in the morning, listening to her husband breathe beside her, and wonder if he lay awake too, running the math, listening to his mother's voice echo off the walls. She caught him once, staring at the ultrasound pictures they'd pinned to the fridge. He flinched when she walked in. Didn't say a word. Just slipped past her like they were strangers. When the baby came, perfect and soft and impossibly theirs, she hoped it would end. She hoped that his mother would take one look and see him, her husband's nose, his father's chin, the unmistakable line of their family in that tiny face. Instead, his mother made her move. It started small, a comment at the baby's welcome gathering. "Oh, he's got such dark hair. Strange, we don't have any of that in our side, do we?" The first guests laughed it off. She smiled through clenched teeth. But later that week, it spread like oil on water. A neighbor dropped by with a pie, and an awkward look in her eye. "You know, some folks are wondering." She said, "Well, you know how people talk." She didn't need to ask who she was. Her mother-in-law's lips never moved much when she whispered. She let other people do the shouting for her. It was the perfect poison, polite enough to deny if confronted, but enough to ruin the trust she'd spent years building. One night, when she finally worked up the courage to ask her husband point-blank if he believed it, he just sighed. "I don't know what to think anymore. Maybe you could understand where she's coming from. It's not like we're saying you did anything." But they were. She could see it in his eyes, the tiny crack that no amount of swaddling blankets or baby smiles could fix. His mother had done what she always did best, twisted something pure into something tainted. And now, she was standing in a home that smelled like her baby's skin and her husband's silence, wondering how many more whispers it would take to drown her completely. She didn't know exactly how yet, but she knew one thing. If his mother wanted a story, she'd give her one. One written in facts, not gossip, and signed by a DNA test she'd deliver herself. It was the little things that gave her away first, the way he'd pause before answering simple questions, the moments he'd stand in the doorway of the nursery and watch the baby sleep without coming closer. Once, she found him scrolling through old photos on his phone, pictures of their honeymoon, their first apartment, his arm around her, both of them grinning like the world was nothing but possibility. When he noticed her standing there, he locked the screen so fast she flinched. "What are you looking at?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light. Nothing, he mumbled, pocketing the phone. Just thinking. She knew what he was thinking. She could practically hear his mother's voice in his head, dripping like a slow leak. You're a good man. You deserve to know the truth. What if she's not telling you everything? It was cruel, how easily she could imagine the conversations. Her mother-in-law showing up just to check in, her tone so sweet it curdled her teeth. Bringing over casseroles she didn't want, rocking the baby in her arms while leaning in close. He really doesn't look like you, you know. Planting seeds of suspicion so small they'd root before anyone noticed they'd taken hold. One night, she heard them in the kitchen. She'd come downstairs for a glass of water, stopping on the last step when she heard her name. You're going to regret this if you don't ask her, his mother said, her voice hushed but sharp. You're a fool if you think women don't do things behind their husband's back. He didn't defend her. Not once. He just sighed, the same heavy sigh he'd started to use every time she asked him if he was okay. She stepped back into the shadows, pressing her hand over her mouth to keep from making a sound. She felt like an intruder in her own home, the same house they'd bought together, painted room by room, imagining how they'd fill it with laughter and children. She'd thought this baby would bind them closer. She'd never imagined it would be the weapon his mother would use to pry them apart. The next day, he barely met her eyes over breakfast. When she asked him to hold the baby while she took a shower, he hesitated, fingers tapping the table like he needed permission to touch his own child. When she handed the baby to him anyway, he cradled him stiffly, as if he were made of glass. She watched from the hallway, tears gathering behind her eyes but refusing to fall. She wouldn't let them see her break. She tried to talk to him that night. She laid the baby down, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of their bed like a stranger waiting for a verdict. Do you believe her? She asked. Tell me. Do you believe your mother? He ran a hand through his hair, staring at the wall instead of her. I don't know what to believe anymore. I want to believe you, I do, but she keeps saying, you were always working late, you didn't come to the office party with me that time, you. She let out a breath that sounded too much like a laugh. So now you're rewriting our entire marriage because she says so? Don't do that, he snapped, his voice sharp for the first time. Don't make it about her. I'm just trying to protect myself. She stared at him, at the man she'd chosen to build a life with, the father of the child asleep in the next room, the man who'd once promised to stand by her when the world turned cold. And here he was, too afraid to stand up to the woman who'd always wanted him chained to her side. Protect yourself from what? She whispered. The truth? But the truth didn't matter to him right now. He'd let the wedge sink in too deep. His mother knew exactly how to pull the strings, and he'd never once cut them. She lay awake that night, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling, listening to his breathing on the other side of the bed that felt wider than a canyon. There was no fight she could win with words alone, not anymore. If he wanted proof, she'd give him proof. And she'd do it so publicly, his mother would choke on the lie she'd spread like poison ivy through every crack of their life. If trust was dead, then facts would have to speak where love no longer could. She told herself she could endure it, that once the baby was bigger, the gossip would fade. But it didn't. It festered in every whispered phone call and every sideways glance when she pushed the stroller through the neighborhood. What stung most wasn't the gossip itself, it was that people she barely knew felt comfortable enough to say it to her face. They weren't even subtle anymore. Don't worry, dear, you're doing the best you can, they'd say, their voices syrupy and fake, their eyes drifting to her wedding ring like it was an inside joke she wasn't in on. Then came the baby's welcome shower, a small backyard thing her sister offered to host. She didn't want it. She'd begged her husband to make an excuse, but he said, Mom would never forgive us if we canceled. That should have told her everything. It was one of those afternoons that looked perfect in photos. Picnic tables with pastel tablecloths, paper lanterns swaying in the breeze, tiny sandwiches and too sweet punch. But under the cheerful decorations, the air felt thick. She could feel the tension humming under every polite laugh, every compliment about how well the baby's grown. Even the cake felt too sweet on her tongue. And there she was, his mother, flitting between groups of guests like a queen bee tending her hive. She'd lean in close, hand on someone's arm, eyes darting around before she murmured just loud enough for a few to catch it. A tight smile here, a knowing nod there. Her husband stayed close to the grill, flipping burgers like his life depended on it. He didn't see it, or maybe he did and chose not to. It was one comment that finally split her open. She'd stepped inside to grab extra napkins when she heard it through the open window, the sound of her mother-in-law's voice ringing clear over the buzz of conversation. Well, you can't really blame him for asking questions, can you? Timing is everything, you know. Boys deserve to know for sure. The woman she was talking to, one of the church ladies, clucked her tongue sympathetically. Such a shame. He seems like such a good father, too. A good father. The words twisted like a blade. The man who wouldn't even touch his own baby without second-guessing himself, all because of this venom, dressed up in Sunday best. She stood there, fingers digging into the stack of napkins so hard they tore. For a moment, she pictured storming outside, screaming every truth she'd bottled up, throwing the lies back in that woman's smug face. But one look through the window stopped her, the baby in his car seat under the shade of the patio umbrella, blissfully unaware that the same people cooing at him were debating whether he was real family or some mistake to be erased. She set the ruined napkins down and slipped into the bathroom, bracing her hands on the sink. The mirror showed her flushed cheeks, eyes brimming with tears she refused to let fall. Not here. Not now. She forced herself to breathe. In. Out. In. Out. The rage settled like ice in her chest. When she stepped back outside, she didn't say a word. She smiled when her sister asked if she was okay. She posed for a few photos with the baby, her husband standing stiffly beside her like a stranger. But inside, she was rewriting the script. That night, while everyone slept off the sugar and gossip, she pulled out her phone. She didn't ask for permission or forgiveness. She searched DNA paternity tests until she found the best lab in town. She filled out the forms. She booked the appointment. She didn't tell her husband, not yet. She didn't owe him that. She didn't owe anyone another chance to turn her life into a rumor. They wanted proof? Fine. She'd give them proof. On paper, signed and sealed. And when the truth came out, she'd make sure the same neighbors who whispered behind her back would see exactly whose lie it really was. She did it on a Wednesday morning when her husband was at work and the baby was drifting in and out of sleep in his car seat. She'd booked the test online, answered the clinic's gentle questions, and paid the extra fee to get the results fast. She'd expected to feel embarrassed sitting in that small waiting room with the word paternity printed discreetly on every clipboard and form. Instead, she felt strangely calm, like every minute spent here was a promise to herself that she'd never again let someone else define her truth. The nurse was kind, maybe kinder than she deserved, gently explaining how the swabs worked and how to hold the baby's chin so he wouldn't fuss. She did it all by the book, her cheek, his, sealed and signed with paperwork that left no room for the kind of gossip her mother-in-law thrived on. On the drive home, she caught herself humming. Not because she was happy, not yet, but because the burden she'd carried alone since the first rumor slipped from that woman's lips suddenly felt lighter. It was the first time in months she felt like she was doing something with all the anger instead of just letting it eat her alive at 3 a.m. At home, she tucked the receipt from the lab into the baby's memory box, an irony that made her want to laugh and scream all at once. A keepsake from the worst kind of betrayal. But someday, when he was old enough, she'd be able to say she'd fought for him from the moment the world tried to say he didn't belong. Her husband still didn't know. He'd been drifting further away since the shower. He came home later each night, hugging the baby stiffly before falling into bed wordless beside her. They'd stopped talking about the rumors because pretending it wasn't happening was easier than facing what it meant, that he'd believed his mother more than his own wife. One evening, she caught him staring at her while she folded laundry. He looked like he wanted to say something, but the words stuck behind his teeth. "What?" she asked, softer than she felt. He shook his head. "Nothing." Then he disappeared into the bathroom, the door clicking shut like a wall slamming down. She almost told him that night. Almost pulled out the signed lab order and said, "Here, look, see how much you're making me do just to keep you." But she didn't. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about her mother-in-law's smug, careful poison. About the way that woman wore her disappointment like a crown, never getting her hands dirty while making sure everyone else did the damage for her. No, she wouldn't waste the proof on a quiet kitchen argument. She wanted it to echo through the same rooms where her mother-in-law whispered, the same church pews where she pretended to be so holy, so moral. She wanted the truth to be undeniable, official, stamped, and read out loud where it would stick to that woman's name like tar. She found a lawyer the same week. Not a divorce lawyer, at least not yet, but someone who specialized in defamation, slander, and the kind of whispered gossip that ruined good names and healthy homes. The lawyer read her story with practiced calm, nodding slowly as she laid out every comment, every neighbor's rumor, every insult her baby would someday grow up to hear. "And you have the results?" the lawyer asked. She pulled out the sealed envelope from her bag, pressing her palm flat against the flap. "I will, in 2 days." The lawyer smiled, small and sharp. Good. Let her keep talking. "We'll be ready." When she walked out of that office, the sky felt a little brighter, the weight on her shoulders more manageable. She wasn't naive enough to think she'd fix her husband with a single sheet of paper, maybe nothing could fix that part. But she could fix the lie that tied him to his mother like a dog on a leash. They'd built this rumor on silence and shame. She was about to bury it in paper and truth. It didn't happen all at once. Her lawyer explained that these things took time, paperwork layered on paperwork, polite letters that turned into official warnings. But gossip didn't wait for process, it rotted quietly while you slept. So she kept her head down, playing the patient mother who didn't mind being called a liar behind closed doors. Her mother-in-law was just as bold as ever. At the next family gathering, a birthday party for a cousin, she overheard that woman saying, "Well, I just hope my son's smart enough to get a real test before he loses everything." You never know with girls like her. Girls like her, the phrase tasted like acid. She smiled so politely she thought her teeth might crack, then excused herself to the kitchen, where she stood at the sink for 10 minutes just to keep from screaming. But when the official court date came through, she didn't flinch. She'd asked for it, an emergency hearing for defamation, spurred on by her mother-in-law's relentless campaign to destroy her name. Her husband hadn't said much since she told him. He'd just looked at her, pale, asking, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And she'd stared back, calm as a blade, and said, "I already did." The morning of the hearing, she dressed carefully. Nothing dramatic, just a simple blouse, neat hair, no makeup she'd have to wipe away if she cried. The baby stayed with her sister in the hallway outside the courtroom, he didn't belong in a place this ugly. Her husband sat beside her, hands clenched on his knees, avoiding her eyes. His mother sat across the aisle, flanked by a few friends who looked smug, like they'd come to see a public shaming. They got one, just not the one they'd expected. When her lawyer rose to speak, she felt her pulse thrum in her throat. He didn't embellish, he just read the facts. The names of the neighbors who'd heard the rumors, the phone calls she'd recorded when her mother-in-law wasn't careful enough to hang up first. The posts she'd made in private Facebook groups, thinly disguised but unmistakable. It all sounded so much uglier when it echoed off the courtroom walls. Her mother-in-law looked bored at first, tapping her nails on her purse, rolling her eyes. But when the lawyer laid the sealed DNA envelope on the table, the tapping stopped. A hush settled in the room like dust in sunlight. "This," the lawyer said, tapping the crisp edge of the report, is a certified test proving beyond any doubt that my client's husband is this child's biological father, with a probability of 99.9%. Her mother-in-law opened her mouth, but the judge silenced her with a glance. For once, the queen bee had nothing clever to say. The lawyer didn't gloat, didn't spit venom, just placed a copy in front of the judge and another in front of her mother-in-law, watching her face crumble like wet paper. Beside her, her husband's shoulders sagged, the air going out of him all at once. He reached for her hand, she let him hold it, but didn't squeeze back. Not yet. The judge spoke clearly for the record, eyes flicking to the woman who'd spread her poison so freely. These rumors have no basis in fact. They have caused measurable harm to the plaintiff and her child. You will cease all defamation immediately or face damages. Her mother-in-law's mouth worked, desperate for spin, but nothing came out. The friends who'd come to watch began to shift uncomfortably, realizing the show was over and they'd backed the wrong side. When it was done, she walked out of the courthouse into the sharp afternoon air, the DNA report tucked into her purse like armor. It was just paper, really, but paper strong enough to tear down the whole lie. Her husband stumbled beside her, trying to find words. I'm so sorry. She didn't look at him. Not here. The wind caught her hair, stung her eyes. She didn't mind. The sting reminded her she was still here, stronger than the rumor, stronger than the fear. The same people who'd once smirked behind her back would have to live with the truth now, and so would the woman who'd thought she could rewrite her son's life with a whisper. They didn't say much on the drive home. The baby babbled in his car seat, a small steady sound that kept her from sinking too deep into her own thoughts. Her husband kept glancing over, like he expected her to explode, but she didn't have any explosions left. Just a bone-deep quiet that felt heavier than any argument ever could. When they pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. He sat there, staring at the steering wheel like it held answers. I didn't know what to believe, he said finally, voice barely above a whisper. She's my mom. She always knows how to. She laughed, sharp and tired. She always knows how to what? Lie? Make you doubt your own eyes? He winced but didn't argue. That was the problem. He never argued when it mattered, not with her mother-in-law, not with the neighbors, not even with himself. He just let the tide carry him wherever she steered him. I'm sorry, he tried again, but the words felt empty in the cramped car. He reached for her hand, she let him take it, but didn't hold on. She stared at his fingers instead, the same ones that once traced their baby's kicks, the same ones that recoiled when his mother whispered poison in his ear. You didn't stand up for us, she said quietly. Not once. He closed his eyes. Maybe there was guilt there. Maybe even regret. But regret was cheap. Regret didn't fix the months she spent lying awake wondering how to prove she was telling the truth about her own child. Inside the house, she laid the baby down for a nap. She watched his tiny chest rise and fall, soft little sighs escaping his lips. He'd never know how ugly it had gotten, she'd make sure of that. She smoothed his hair off his forehead and pressed a kiss there, a silent promise that he'd never wonder where he belonged. Later that week, word spread like wildfire. The same neighbors who once whispered at church now gave her tight, awkward smiles at the grocery store. Some even dared to say, well, we always knew it couldn't be true, pretending they hadn't drunk down every drop of gossip her mother-in-law served them. She didn't bother correcting them, they weren't worth the breath. Her mother-in-law, so loud and smug before, had fallen silent. Her lawyer called with updates, the woman would have to pay damages for defamation. Not much, but enough to sting. Enough to leave a mark on her pristine reputation. She'd heard from her sister-in-law that the older woman was spinning new stories now, how it was all a misunderstanding, how she'd just wanted to protect her son. But no one was buying it anymore. Not after the DNA report had been read out loud, stamped and filed in the court record for anyone to see. Her husband begged to fix things. He brought home flowers. Made her coffee just the way she liked it. Offered to cut off his mother for good. Maybe he even meant it. But trust didn't grow back overnight, not when it had been cut so deep. One night, she sat across from him at the kitchen table, the DNA report between them like a third presence. "I can forgive you for doubting me," she said, voice low and steady. But I don't know if I can forget it. Not yet. He didn't argue. He just nodded, shoulders slumped, eyes red-rimmed like a boy who'd just realized the monster under the bed had always been the one tucking him in at night. She moved forward quietly. Opened a separate bank account in her name only. Found a counselor for herself, not for them, not for him, just her. She stopped answering her mother-in-law's calls completely. Blocked the number when the voicemails turned from fake apologies to insults again. Some nights, she still lay awake replaying every moment she'd let herself feel small for the sake of keeping the peace. But then she'd listen to her baby's soft breathing down the hall, a sound more powerful than any lie ever told. And every time she closed her eyes, she saw that courtroom, the hush when the judge read out the truth, the way her mother-in-law's mouth hung open, caught in her own web. That was her closure. The truth, on paper. The silence, hard won. The promise to herself that she'd never again stand alone while the people who claimed to love her tore her apart.